Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Life After DD214. Today, I have with me a very special guest, Isreal Dyson. How are you doing, my friend?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Hey, welcome. Thanks for having me on, and I'm doing well, man. Just living life to the fullest.
Man, I'm happy to hear that, especially since you have such a young kid.
Little 4-year-old about to turn 5 next month, actually.
Oh, man,
yeah.
Congratulations! Happy birthday!
Yeah, thank you.
This will actually probably come out around his birthday, so yes, happy birthday!
Okay, perfect timing.
Exactly. So let's just jump right into it. Izzy, tell me about yourself.
Okay. Well, name's Isreal, Army veteran. I was a 15 Alpha when I was in, so I flew the OH-58 Delta, the Kiowa. Right now, I'm obviously a civilian now, family man, doing my family man thing, just doing everything one day at a time.
I love it. So you said you were a Kiowa pilot in the Army. So let's jump back. When and why did you decide to join the Army?
Yeah, so all right, so for me, the military is like ingrained in the family, right? So like if I just go down the lineage, just start from the top, my grandfather, my father's side, retired command sergeant major. My father retired sergeant first class. He was a drill sergeant. My uncle was actually a Kiowa crew chief, so he retired also, got out sergeant first class. My aunt on my father's side, I'm not sure her MOS or anything like that, but also Army, retired. If we hop over to my mother's side, my grandmother retired sergeant first class Army. Both my uncles, Army. I believe both were officers. And then when it comes to the siblings, my brother is actually in the Navy still. He's a senior chief, and my sister, she did about 11 Air Force nurse. So they pretty much got all of us.
Yeah, sounds like you're raising a Marine now. So just to make sure that we hit them all.
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna try to hope that I've got enough saved up for him so he can make his own decisions.
That's fair. You know what? That's fair. I get that. So before you did, we know each other from a different story.
Correct.
Yeah, we were in ROTC together. We did college together. So let's talk about how you got into Virginia State University and their ROTC program.
Yeah, so my story is kind of interesting. My father's final duty station was what's formerly known as Fort Lee, Virginia, which was right outside of Virginia State, Petersburg. So pretty much I was the first person to go to college at the time. Didn't have the best grades, but it's good enough to get in. So Virginia State was right up the street, local for us. So pretty much after high school graduation, it's like, all right, what you gonna do? So I got into Virginia State. Didn't have any money, no scholarships, nothing like that. So the good old Command Sergeant Major Dyson, he gave me a loan for my first year. He said, hey, there's tuition, make me proud. So I show up on the doorsteps at Virginia State, and then I joined ROTC. I'm like, all right, I got the first year taken care of. I don't know how the heck I'm going to figure out the rest of this. So I joined ROTC. My goal to bust my tail, get that scholarship, and be able to pay for the rest of it. So that's kind of how the story happened. Getting started.
Nice. And did you get a 3-year, 2-year scholarship? What was your scholarship that you got?
Yeah. So I got the 3-year. And actually that's a little interesting as well because at the end of my first year, I didn't have a scholarship. So I actually enlisted in the National Guard.
Okay.
Over the summer. Yeah, over the summer I enlisted in the National Guard. I was going to do the simultaneous membership program. 2 days after signing on the dotted line, raising my hand, I get a nasty gram from our colonel at the time. She pretty much said, have your tail in my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I show up the next day, at her office. The command team from the Guard who was there, I'm there with my father, and the colonel's there, and basically she had them discharge me on the spot, and then she signed me up for the scholarship on the spot. Basically, don't go to the Guard, I got you, stay in ROTC, you're good. So that's how I ended up getting my 3-year scholarship.
Got it. I mean, to be fair, like you didn't know what the future had when you signed that dotted line.
Yeah, basically, like I'm there, and I'm like, okay, I busted my tail all year. I thought I was like a model cadet. I joined all the teams I could join. PT scores off the roofs, grades are great, and I'm like, you still didn't give me any money, so I got to figure something out. So I did what I had to do, and luckily, she brought me back in and gave me what I was looking for.
Nice. That's awesome. And then you get 3 years all paid for, plus you got all the fun stuff. Because the ROTC program like invested heavily in you. You went to air assault, and did you do airborne too?
Yeah, so in undergrad, I was fortunate. I got to do airborne after my freshman year. I got to do air assault after my sophomore year, and then obviously junior year we did advanced camp, and then graduated in 4, and then would have a commission. Yeah, but I mean I was fully locked in, engaged. Ranger Challenge Team, color guard, scabbard and blade. I was definitely like
You were invested.
Mr. ROTC. Actually was Mr. ROTC for the pageant too.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah,
right. I forgot about that.
all the above.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's one of the things that I find really fascinating is that you come in, you don't have any insignia on your uniform, whatever, and then you commission, and you're one of the only people who commissions, and you have not one but two badges. And then obviously your medals and stuff that you earned for joining the military. But a lot of people don't walk out of a commissioning source with even one badge, and you walked out with two. And I thought that was really impressive.
It was pretty good bragging rights. And everybody knows when you're in the military, the more decoration you've got, people have a perception of you ahead of time. So when I came in double stacked already, it already gave me a little, step ahead, at least in perception wise.
Yeah, because they at least kind of assumed that you probably knew a little bit more than just some other kid off the street. I mean, the color of the bar hasn't changed. It's still butter.
Yeah, definitely so. But it gives you a little extra accolade that you can try to wear your hat on.
Yeah, definitely. And then you commission second lieutenant aviation.
Correct. Yep. So Army Aviation commissioned, went down to flight school, and ended up becoming a OH-58 Delta pilot, so a Kiowa pilot. Yeah. Then obviously that was my aviation officer track. That was my route.
And so let's talk a little bit about your time in. Do anything fun? Go places that you enjoyed and not so much enjoyed?
Honestly, in the scope of things, when I compare it to most careers, mine was brief. I obviously went down to flight school in Fort Rucker, Alabama, so Southern Alabama. Flight school took a little bit of time. Obviously, that's a long program, especially when you go to one of the combat aircrafts. You have a little bit longer time than if you go to a lift aircraft. So this now, mind you, this is I graduated in 09. Graduated flight school in like the end of 10ish. And immediately after flight school, my first duty station is Fort Wainwright, Alaska. So yeah, Fairbanks, Alaska, first duty station. But mind you, when I go to the duty station, they're already deployed. So immediately after getting in and process and everything like that, I'm on the next plane over to Iraq, fresh out the gate. So don't know anybody at the unit. Barely proficient in my aircraft and my craft, and it's just like, all right, you're going downrange, buddy. So yeah, went to Iraq. Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, and by the way, you're in charge too, so Yeah, but Iraq, and then back to Alaska. But I actually got out in 2015 from Alaska, so I didn't go to any other stations after that.
Okay, all right. I want to go back to this comment that you had made about the difference between a lift airframe and a attack airframe. You said one is longer than the other. For me, I was logistics, so I have no idea. Like the extent of aircraft knowledge that I have is, I can hook this up to the bottom of the aircraft so that it can do sling load operations. Like that's my extent. So let's talk about that for those of us who don't know.
Okay, yeah. So obviously, the Army's inventory has changed since I've been out. Going on 10 years now. But when I was in there, basically we had for the attack platforms. I was in the OH-58 Delta, the Kiowa, which is the scout helicopter. So scout reconnaissance. We did have munitions on the aircraft. The main attack bird is the Apache, which is obviously still flying now. So that's the big bad boy with all the big guns. Then you've got the taxi, the Black Hawk. I give them some mess about that, but definitely a very important craft. And then
I've been taxiing around in a Black Hawk. I get it.
And then the last one, we got big sexies like the Chinook. So of course um, and people sleep on the Chinook, but it's a nice airframe. I like it.
Yeah, I love it. It's very comfortable, except when it's super fully loaded and you're and you're crammed in there. But why does one take longer than the other?
When you come into flight school, everybody's together, and we train on a training helicopter first. Back then, it was the TH-67 Jet Ranger. Now, I'm not sure if they still train on the 67, but we all train on the 67. After training on the 67, we have basically like a sessions or like an OML. So pretty much at the end of qualifying for just basic flight qualification, they have a list of slots available for the different aircrafts, and depending on your rank within the class, you get to choose first. So it doesn't mean necessarily that the top person in the class is going Apache right away. If the top person in the class wants to drive a Hawk, he's getting a Hawk. If the second person in the class wants to get an Apache, he's getting an Apache. So basically, you go down the list, and don't get me wrong, I was decent. I wasn't anybody's star pupil. There just happened to be a Kiowa waiting for me when it came to my time to pick. I love the mission, the scout mission. That's just fit kind of like my personality. Not to mention my uncle, former crew chief of the Kiowa. So, I was just, there's no brainer for me. I knew what I wanted to do.
Got it. That makes sense. And so, how long did you stay at Rucker after you picked the Kiowa?
Yeah. So okay. So basically, the advanced airframe training for the Hawks and the Chinooks. Once again, not exactly sure the time frame. It's been so long, but let's say probably like an additional 3 to 4 months. The attack airframes is probably like an additional 6 to 7. I want to say my numbers could be off, but obviously we had more time because we had to do aircraft gunnery. So the Hawk pilots and the Chinook pilots, they don't have to do the gunnery, but us in the attack aircraft, we have to actually maneuver the aircraft, put rounds downrange, have to be proficient in that, which takes a lot more time.
That makes sense. And it takes a lot more effort on the ground too. And I know that only because we've had to do some aircraft gunnery back where we're at, and there's a very specific level of human being that you have to be in order to run that range. And I was not of that rank. So let's put it that way. So you're in Wainwright, you said, and you do your deployment, you come back, and then it's about 2014, 2015 time frame, and you're planning on getting out, or what happened there?
All right, so we'll get back in like 12, I believe. So I actually had like the full couple years in Wainwright with garrison time. Things had started to die down with Iraq, so we were starting to transition to like the doctrine and the way we were training and teaching things. We started practicing more Cold War tactics and things like that, force on force. Just prior to getting ready for the career course, the unit was actually getting ready to go to Korea. And then this is when things started to change for me, and this is when I started leaning towards to getting out the military. Pretty much, I'll try to be as try to be as honest and transparent as possible. This is kind of like a rough patch of life that I tuck away a little bit. This stage in Alaska was like, first of all, it's Alaska. I was also a single black soldier in aviation. I was the only black pilot in my, I was the only black officer in my squadron. We did have the CW4 there. So, things were just a little bit different. Life was a little interesting. And, although I loved flying, there were some setbacks, like with my, I guess my proficiency with it, my desire to do so, especially after, deploying fresh out of the gate, going downrange to a war zone. I don't want to pretend like my experience was, anything crazy, because, a lot of people have deployed and have, lost people and some things like that. But, still just there were a lot of different things that I was enlightened to. I started to change kind of like my desires at that point. So, during this time is when I, my mentality, like I said, was starting to shift and change, and that's when I started leaning towards, getting out.
Okay. All right. And so there's a lot of good, or a lot of things that you were considering as you were getting out. Like, what was the biggest worries that you were going through? First off,
Honestly,
I think it's trying to one is getting out of Alaska.
definitely, definitely. I do feel I do feel like Alaska jaded me quite a bit. Plenty of people have gone there, have done well, and made it out, and continued on with great careers. But I had some things I would say, professionally and personally, with my time in Alaska that really just it made me start to think like I don't know if this is what I'm going to do forever, type of deal. But I would say honestly, when I started to get towards that point of getting out, I wasn't really worried. Probably a little bit ignorant on my part. I was a little overconfident, thinking to myself, man, like I've got a great resume now. Like I can get out and be the king of the world. And then of course, you get out and you get the rude awakening. It's not that easy. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that rude awakening.
Definitely, for sure. The first things I realized is how much what I did not translate
Okay.
to the civilian. So, I'm thinking, I'm operations officer, former platoon leader, pilot. I'm thinking I'm the man. Like I got the resume for days. And of course, when you get out into the real world and you go to apply to these jobs, and they're like, oh, that's cute, that's nice. But do you have this cert? Do you have that cert? Do you have this degree, that degree? So it's definitely it's a rude awakening very fast.
Absolutely. And I think that especially when it comes to senior leaders and officers, we get told one thing and then the world tells us that was wrong. Like, again, as you mentioned, operations officer, platoon leader, pilot, right? You've got all of this leadership experience, right? But when you go to a job interview, because you applied for a manager position, a leadership position, they look at you like you're just some 28-year-old dude who has no experience in life or no experience in what they do, because they're 40-plus-year-old people who have been doing it for 20 something years, and you're trying to take their role, or you're trying to be part of their team, and they're like, this guy like doesn't pass the sniff test for us. Um, which
Exactly.
to us is like, no, we're super qualified, and to them they're like, no, you're not.
Like if we rewind back to like what we were saying earlier, coming out of college, already being double stacked, and then obviously triple stacked by the time we get out of flight school, you show up to your unit and they see your resume on your chest, and they give you respect and credit for it. You get to the civilian world, they say thank you for your service, and then they say what can you do for me?
Yeah.
So it's like it's a night and day difference, especially for junior soldiers. When you get, the more junior you get out, I mean, don't get me wrong, I've heard great success stories about companies that are headhunting for soldiers, and they're like, yeah, we bring them on, we know they've got some talents and whatnot, and then we can groom them, etc. But for the most part, at least in my experiences, it's like, hey, I appreciate what you did for the country, but you don't have what I'm looking for. So that was just for lack of better words, a rough transition initially.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what about your ACAT process?
So for me, I don't think I utilized it as best I could. Of course, went to the briefings, went to some classes, whatnot, trying to find out about what benefits are available to me, as transitioning. But at this stage, of course, once again, young and dumb, overconfident, I was just hell bent on escaping. I call it Alaskatraz. Me and my wife laugh at that still to this day. Escaping Alaskatraz, getting back, back home, and thinking that I was just going to hit the ground running. I definitely regret not taking a full advantage as much as I could have about all the benefits that are out there available.
And I think, again, that's one of those misconceptions that or I'm sorry, that's one of those biases that we walk into ACAP with, right? It happened to me. I'm not ashamed to say that I walked into ACAP thinking to myself, do I really need this? My resume speaks for itself. I'm gonna be fine. And what made it even worse for me is especially was I had all these other people telling me the exact same thing. Like, you're going to be fine. You've been doing this for X amount of years. You're going to be an asset to someone's company out there. And then you get out and you're like, where are all these job opportunities? And everyone's like, I don't have them for you.
Yep. It was very humbling, and to say the least, it was very humbling. If I could go back, do it over again, I would have definitely dug in a lot more, invested a lot more to just make sure that I had a better footing to get myself on the ground once I got out.
Yeah. And what do you think that footing would have been? Right? Like, what would you have done differently other than just pay more attention?
I would have had a plan,
Nice.
because when I left, my plan was move back home, bum with my sister for a little while, and a huge job, and then move on with my life. And then the weeks turned to months, and then next thing you know, I'm like, whew. And ultimately, once I did get back going, I felt like I got back going way beneath my capability and what my experience and resume should suggest. So it humbled me quite a bit. Of course, with my mentality, my upbringing, you just drive on, work hard, show your worth. So something that was it's okay, but at the same time, it was a pride hit for sure, definitely a pride hit to know that I came from being a O3 commission officer, leading people, basically being a subordinate again. It was definitely humbling. So I would say the biggest thing that I would go back and do again is I would have a concise plan before I departed.
Smart. And just out of curiosity, because I think a lot of people have, as they're getting out, they have like a vague idea of what they're going to do, much like you did, much like I did, right? When it comes to that plan in place, when do you think someone should start thinking, okay, I know I'm going to get out. I don't know exactly what day, but at what point, like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, a year prior to you leaving the military, should you really like start working on that?
Unrealistic answer: the minute you have the inclination that this isn't what you want to do anymore, you need to start developing a plan. Realistic answer: I would say 6 months to a year. 6 months probably, but it takes. I would say it takes time to start researching possible routes, start networking, fixing a resume to make it a civilian resume rather than a military resume. If you have the time in advance to, land some certs, some qualifications, anything that can help guide your steps, just the more time, the better is what I would say, because the real world is the real world. And once you're out there, that cushion from good old Uncle Sam, it's gone.
Yeah. And you think about it and you're like, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be good. And then all of a sudden, that paycheck is done. And you're like, oh, I'm not so good right now.
That part.
Yeah,
That
that's the part that people forget about. And especially that networking piece that you just mentioned, right? I think that's super important, because you didn't stay in Alaska.
see,
So
and
how did
all
you
that
plug
foundation.
into that pipeline?
And that's the thing. Initially, when I got out, I did plug into my personal connections. I'm actually a member of two fraternities. So I was talking to fraternity members who had connections. I actually landed a couple of good corporate interviews. I bombed them. I bombed them terribly. I'll be honest and admit. I remember one of my frat brothers was a pretty big dog, Comcast up in Philly. Got me an interview. I was just off the strength of his name, and then I went up there, and this is my first interview. Not ever, but like let's just put it this way: I did interviews in for menial jobs in like high school and things like that, but I never did any interviews with the military. So this is my first real world big boy interview, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I could just read the guy's face like you're not ready.
Yeah.
And I had a few interviews for things that I thought were at the level of what my experience and resume should be. I bombed them all, and it just makes you think. So like I said, those connections, they helped. Definitely helped with the network and the connections, but I wasn't the best version of myself ready to secure the deal. So they didn't work out for me.
Yeah. Going through multiple rounds of interviews or multiple interviews myself, I understand completely. I think my very first interview, one of my first interviews, the lady was like, you just don't have the experience that we're looking for. And I was
Mm,
like, I
that
just
hurt.
spent 8 years leading people in the job, or like doing the job description that you have. Like, I have done all of these things. And she's like, but it doesn't say this on your resume. And I'm like, point to where you think it doesn't say that. Like all of the things I did, and I was like, it's there. And she was just like, I just don't think that you are right for this position. And yeah, it makes you think, man. It makes you feel like, okay, maybe I'm not at the level that I'm supposed to be at. And then you start like tailoring or paring down your job searches to something a little more or a little less, I should say. But you're right, man. It takes a huge ego hit.
Oh yeah, for sure. The first position I landed out the military, I actually ended up getting into an admin role. I was aiming for the stars. I was shooting high. I was shooting for what I thought I was worth. I got nothing. And then what ended up happening was I got in. I was like, okay, I just need to get my foot in the door somewhere, and then I'll show them. And that's exactly what I did. I got my foot in the door. I was an admin for an association management company here in the DC area. And then within 6 months, I got promoted to a project management role. But the issue was what we do doesn't always translate. And if you can't sell yourself, they're not going to just take the chance on you. So I had to take a step back just to be gainfully employed.
Mm-hmm.
And once I got in there, then they're like, oh, wow, this guy is special. And then I moved up. But, obviously still some transition issues there. But still, I still had some militaryisms in my back pocket that I, didn't relinquish. And, the fit wise, there were some ways of operating that I just couldn't get out of my head. I didn't want to conform to the civilian life the way they wanted to sometimes. And I was there for about 3 years before I, had to call that one quits. But it's definitely an adjustment that I think a lot of people don't put enough thought into before they get out the military.
Yeah. I'm glad that you lasted 3 years, dude. To be honest with you, like I didn't last one. I barely last one. Actually, I'll take that back. I just celebrated my 1 year anniversary at my first job. 2 weeks later, I got let go. Like, dude, I'm happy that you took 3 years before all that had to change for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some, obviously, I've got some buddies that have had some pretty bad stories of, their transitions. I've got some success stories too. Don't get me wrong, but it's an adjustment for everyone. Sometimes the cookies crumble the right way, sometimes they don't. So I do feel like I'm blessed for that experience I had, because that's another good resume bullet. The time I did have with them, but at this point now it's ancient history.
Yeah. I mean, and to be honest, right, like you just said something really important, which is you just added another resume bullet. Like once you get out of the military, right, like now all of a sudden your resume is starting to get more and more strong, like to more of what we should have gotten, what we believe we should have gotten previously. And I think that that's what we need to realize. There comes a time when your resume is just going to be like Army, one small bullet, and then the rest of your experiences above. And that's what you're really building your new professional reputation off of.
I'm glad you said that, because interviews I've had over the years for other positions and things like that, like when I first started out, searching around, obviously, like you said, the Army information was all there, and like all my, examples, tell me a time when this, tell me a time when that, all my examples were in the military. As my time outside of the military grew and my experiences grew outside the military, I've noticed I have less and less reference to the military, and they're, more so concerned with these references to the civilian world because those are things that they can actually relate to. Now, I know for a fact that some of the things that they're asking, the requirements, and they're like, how do you think you can, how's this relate, whatever. I know good and darn well that the military experiences could cover that basis, but they don't want to hear it. Yeah. They don't care. They want to know what relates to them. You say Army operations, they're like, that's cool. Do you have business management operation? Like that's what they want to know. So it's definitely your post-military career and, building that resume is vitally important to your life after.
Absolutely. You got to get through that first part, right? Like that first hump is just the tip of the spear of, okay, this is going to hurt. but you have to get through it. And also, like, you're not going to be the first person to go through it, right? There's not a lot of people who, as you guys know, Bob Lilly, previous guest, like, he had a job before he even retired. He is the exception, not the rule. I want to talk about the resume itself, right? Because what most people don't realize is everybody has a different resume, and everybody tells you that their resume is what you need to have. How many different versions of your resume do you have or did you have to get through any of these positions?
So the thing that I learned after the fact, after a lot of trial and error, is that you need to cater it. I mean, it's tedious. It's very tedious, but you literally have to cater your resume for each application. I know it's tedious. Might make it a little bit easier now with AI, but you literally have to recater your resume every time you're applying because, you know, depending on what field you're going into, some positions might want, bullet points. Some positions might want paragraphs of action items and, quantifiable events. Um, you know, you might have a business centric position, so you need to focus it more towards, like business terms and aspects. You might have something that's, more scientific based. You need to gear it and base it towards that. Rule of thumb for, general resume. But I think that it's really important to not just blanket apply with the same cookie cutter resume every single time. You really need to stop, look at the job descriptions, look at the requirements, and then you really have to cater each one. I know it's tedious, but if you want to stand out, if you want to catch their eye, the hiring manager, you're gonna have to cater each one. Once I learned that the hard way, of course, you have all your old save files, keep them on your on your hard drive or whatever, but you know you can't be lazy with it. You have to put in the due diligence and put your best foot forward for each position you're aiming for.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I learned was if you have a bullet point, just add it. You create this living, breathing document, which is your master resume, quote unquote. And it just constantly gets updated. And then every time that you decide, hey, I want to apply, you just cut out the things that are not relevant, and that's your resume. And to go back to different types of resumes, I typically like to keep a one pager. And I just started a new position, or I just started a new job a couple days ago. And during that process, I got my one page resume kicked back by one of the hiring managers. He says, you have enough experience right now to be 2 pages long. And I was like, that goes against all the things that we've
Everything
learned.
I learned.
Like, right? And even before that, like, I have an IT resume, which is like, it's got my picture on it. It's got like all these cool designs, right? Because we're supposed to be developers who can also make things look pretty. Um, so like, I've got this weird IT resume. I've got a website. That's another quote unquote resume that I have. I always find it fascinating that every time I talk to somebody about like, oh, so tell me about your resume, it's always something different that they have. It's never been like codified, in my opinion, to be like, this is the perfect resume.
No, that's very true. That's very true. And it's like different industries want to see different things, and they want to present it in different ways. Some postings are helpful and kind of like give you a hint into like what they're looking for, but a lot of times it's just you have to know, or you have to do your own research, like what's the best way to present myself for this industry. And once again, tedious, extra work on your part, but in order to put your best foot forward and stand out, you got to do due diligence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a mentor when I got out. Literally, his job was to help veterans get hired into civilian jobs. One of the things that he said is, we don't go to job boards and just blanket apply to everything. That's called spray and pray. Do you spray and pray in the Army? No. You take controlled, well thought out shots. And just as you mentioned, yes, it's tedious. That's why people will apply to maybe 5 to 8 opportunities a week because they have to do the tailoring. They have to find and also research the company. And oh, by the way, changing the font because they apparently like Arial instead of Times New Roman. Who knew?
Yeah.
Um, it's a lot of different things. So you got out. Things are starting to roll. What about your VA disability? Did you happen to apply for it?
Yep. So another anecdotal story of me being young and dumb. When I first got out the military, hit the ground running, still had a little something saved up, wasn't really going super hard on my VA stuff. And let me take a step back further. Document, 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 document. Stop being prideful. Go to the doctor. Like, keep your notes. That's one thing I didn't do much. I'm macho. I'm not hurt. Let's just put some ice on it. I didn't, go to the doctor as much as I could have. Didn't document things like I could have. So anyway, fast forward. When I'm out the military, right now I'm at 90. But when I first got out the military, I want to say I didn't even apply until I want to say after the end of that first job. So after the end of those 3 years, then I was like, okay, funds are going to be interesting. Oh, I have a whole place where I can be getting funds from right now that I haven't even touched. So then I finally, went and, I went on my own and just once again, overconfident. I know what I'm doing. I don't need help. I got 20. That's not much. What's that,
I got 20
$200?
bucks in the pocket too.
Then then I was like, okay, maybe I need to, link up with one of these, consultation firms or something like that, see if somebody could help me, which I did. I ended up getting up to 70. Okay, it's a little bit better, bringing a little bit more in extra on top of, like I said, once again, got a civilian job, just a little extra ice on the top. Then after that, then I was like, I sat there for like another year or two, and then finally I was like, I think I'm still leaving something on the table. So I go back again, and then I finally get bumped up to 90. I've been out the military 10 years. I've been receiving 90 for about 4. So the one thing I will say is, hey, you served, you did stuff,
You got hurt.
you'd experienced things, claim it, put it in, do what you got to do. Don't wait, because it's literally like, why not? You're just leaving stuff on the table. And once again, young and dumb and feeling invincible and just not realizing that the world is real out here and that, things cost money, like little people cost money, things like that. If you have something available to you, you need to go get it.
Yeah. First time you decided to try to go it alone, right? Did you just do it online just to kind of see like what happened and what's going on there?
Um, yes and no. Okay. I went to like one of the free places run by the state, and I got a old grumpy DA civilian, and he was it was a little rough around the edges. I got kind of turned off from seeking help, so I technically did go to someone first,
Okay, that's fair.
and you know that wasn't very fruitful. So then I went, okay, let me just go online, just do it myself, like just log in, do it myself. I only got, like I said, then I only got 20 out of the deal. Now after that, then I found a, like a, I don't know what you call them, a private third party, group to help me out. And that's when I got bumped up to the 70. Now with them, of course, you got to pay into it. They have like these deals where it's like, depending on what you get, then that depends on how much you owe them, etc. But it was nice. Got bumped up quite a bit. Some extra pocket change. After I got bumped up to 70, then I went back solo again and bumped myself up to 90.
Oh, okay. So you were able to basically, I'm going to assume here, but you took what you learned to get to that extra 50%. You took what you
Exactly.
learned, was like, hey, listen, I don't need to spend another however many dollars to get you to do this. I can do this. And then you brought yourself up to a 90%. That's incredible.
And that's kind of like where I'm sitting now. I still feel like I should be at the full 100, and I have attempted, this past year and a half, in particular, I have attempted to do so. My issue now is I know for a fact that there are elements in this body, but being macho, not going to get things documented. The issue is, how do you prove it? At this stage, my thought process is, if I do want to get that last little bit, I'm going to probably have to go through another firm. But yeah, so document, go to the doc, don't be macho, do what you got to do, you know?
Absolutely. One of the things I wanted to discuss with you, or some of the final questions that I've got, is after all of that, what's the biggest piece of advice that you could give someone who's about to transition or is doing it right now?
The one thing I would say, and you know, like I said, I hit the ground running at first, and then I actually, after I left that first job, I actually went back to get my master's.
Okay.
One thing that I would say, if you've got these education benefits, you know, GI Bill, voc rehab, whatever, if it works out for, you know, for your life and your family and your finances, I would say when you first get out, do something to credential yourself, and I think it'll definitely help, you know, set you up for your future career path versus, you know, getting out and then just, you know, thinking that you're gonna just land the big fish right out the gate. You know, be a little humble and realize you might have to reinvent yourself and use the resources they provide for you to do so. So like I said, I didn't touch my GI Bill until, you know, being out for 4 years, but I could have easily got straight out, went straight into school, and then, you know, might have a whole different, you know, path for these past 10 years.
Yeah. Well, again, like, this is hindsight is 2020, right? But we're in a position in our lives where we can actually turn around, reach back, and say, like, pump your brakes, do this first. Yes, the world is different, but you know, there's still certain things that we can impart on in order to make sure that other people don't make the exact same mistakes that we did.
Like the same way that we do different schools when we're in the military to, you know, broaden your career and, help broaden your military resume, give yourself different opportunities. It's the same thing on the outside, different schoolings, different certs, you know, whatever, in whatever field and industry that you're trying to, to pursue. I would say, you know, that is definitely important. Like, if it's available to you, utilize it.
Yeah.
Because that's what they're looking for.
Yeah. And especially if, like, you knew what you wanted to do after you got out. Which brings me to this question that I should have asked you earlier. Why didn't you decide to just remain a pilot, like, in the civilian world?
And, you know, the thought has been in my mind a million times. I don't know how many times over these past 10 years I've, you know, thought about trying to, you know, transition to be a fixed wing, like, you know, flying commercial, whatnot. I'm a low hour guy. So even though I deployed, you know, once we got back from deployment, we got to a stage where the money dried up. It got to the point where our flight hours were so limited that we actually had to fly simulators in order to keep up our proficiency and actually get our flight hours to stay current. So I've only got about 500. Most of these companies out here, if you're a straight up civilian, they want you to have at least 2,000 before they even consider you for a job. If you have military experience, they'll let you get away with 1,200. I'm at 5. So then my thought process is, how do I make up the last little bit? And it's doable. Don't get me wrong. It's definitely doable. But, you know, life comes at you fast and life is real. Paying for your own flight hours is, you know, it's a chore. It's expensive. I do believe, you know, with the voc rehab, there's ways to navigate that, get into flight school and things like that. On the civilian side, pay for transition. But, you know, life comes at you fast, and then before you know it, 10 years has passed and you haven't pursued it. So, you know, still a thought in the back of my mind, but it's like, you know, the longer I'm out of it, that thought is further and further back.
Gotcha. And that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I have one last question for you before we end this episode. Izzy, what's one thing that you picked up in the Army that you still do to this day?
Too many things. I mean, like, for example, all my clocks are still in military time.
You've been out 10 years, dude.
It's still military
it's 8
time.
p.m.
Let me think. You know, I still have my Armyisms, like, you know, backwards planning, you know, over communicating, like, to be early is to be on time. The wife hates it because she's not on time for anything, and I'm always a stickler for it. You know,
she's gonna see this. I'm gonna let you know.
Of course. You know, even something as simple as, like, if I'm packing a bag to go to the gym, or packing a bag for an international trip. I'm like, I'm doing a packing list, make sure I got every single cord and charger and this and that. Like, it's just, I would say just just the military isms are still ingrained in you, and they're hard to let go. But one thing I will say is you got to be careful about that though, because when you get on the outside, some of that stuff isn't received as well when you're dealing with people that don't have that background. See, you can't change who you are and what you earned and what you experienced, but sometimes you do have to pacify it a little bit because the people on the outside will look at you kind of cross-eyed. But when you talk to other vets or people that are still in, they understand you still, but you just have to be cognizant that not everybody understands.
Yeah. And you could usually tell which one's the vet, especially at the airport, because one, they have the uniform, right? They've got the hat. Some of them have a beard. You have a beard. But they all have like these military style backpacks. And 9 times out of 10, I would say 99 times out of 100 really is all the straps are tucked in.
Oh yeah.
Thank you so much, my friend, taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with me tonight. I appreciate your time.
No, definitely. Hey, thank you for inviting me. It was good to talk with you and share some of my experiences and whatnot. Dig back into some good memories and some bad, but hey, I appreciate it.
Hey, there it is. So, all right, everyone, take some time, like, share, comment, subscribe, turn on that notification bell. That's a new one for me, guys. Later, lads.